The rain hadn't let up since noon, and the diner windows had gone foggy with the breath of 40 customers crammed into a space built for 30. Nathaniel Cole noticed the way the busboy's hands trembled before he noticed anything else about him. The kid couldn't have been older than 19, balancing a tray of dishes that rattled with every step, eyes darting toward the corner table like he was bracing for something. Nathaniel had spent 11 years reading bodies before they moved, first overseas, then in a job he didn't talk about anymore. Fear had a shape. It showed up in the shoulders first. Across from him, his daughter Daisy was stacking sugar packets into a wobbling tower, narrating the whole construction project under her breath the way 7-year-olds did when they thought no one was listening. She knocked one packet sideways and giggled, and for a second the diner felt like an ordinary Tuesday. Then the man at the corner table stood up so fast his chair screeched against the tile, and the busboy's tray went sideways, and 3 plates hit the floor in a crash that silenced the whole room. "Are you actually this incompetent?" The man's voice cut through the diner like he wanted everyone to hear it, which he probably did. He was maybe 50, silver at the temples, wearing a coat that cost more than the diner's monthly rent. "I asked you to clear the table, not redecorate the floor." The busboy dropped to his knees, scrambling for the broken porcelain, mumbling apologies that nobody asked for. The man didn't step back to give him room. He stepped closer, looming, and when the kid's hand shook reaching for a shard of plate, the man kicked it away from him, almost playfully, like he was swatting at a fly. "Leave it," the man said. "Get the manager. I want him fired tonight." Daisy had stopped building her tower. She was watching with the stillness kids get when they sensed something adult and ugly happening near them. "Dad," she whispered, the way she always did when she already knew what was coming. Nathaniel was already standing. He crossed the diner without rushing, which somehow made it worse for the man to watch, the unhurried certainty of someone who'd made this kind of walk before. He stopped between the kneeling busboy and the man in the expensive coat, close enough that the man had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. "He's cleaning it up," Nathaniel said. "That's enough." The man blinked, recalibrating, the way people did when an obstacle appeared where they expected compliance. "And you are?" "Someone telling you to back up." A short laugh, more breath than humor. "Do you understand who you're talking to?" "No," Nathaniel said. "But I understand exactly what you are." Behind him, he heard the busboys breathing slow slightly, the held tension released just a fraction. And from the counter, a young woman in a server's apron, dark hair pulled back, an old burn scar peeking out from her sleeve when she reached for a rag, looked up and watched the whole exchange with attention that didn't match her uniform, not fear. Something closer to calculation, like she was filing every word away for later. Nobody in that diner knew yet that her name wasn't really Bridget, the name stitched onto her apron, or that by morning the man in the expensive coat would be a name half the province recognized, for all the wrong reasons. The man's smile thinned out but didn't disappear. He looked Nathaniel over slowly. The work boots scuffed pale at the toes, the canvas jacket with a coffee stain from this morning's thermos, the kind of clothes that told a story he clearly thought he already knew. "You should sit back down," he said, voice gone soft in a way that was somehow colder than the shouting. "Before you create a problem you genuinely cannot afford." "The only problem here," Nathaniel said, "is you thinking a coat like that buys you permission to treat people like garbage." A few tables over, a teenager had her phone half raised, recording without trying too hard to hide it. The man clocked it and didn't care. Men who'd never been filmed doing something that cost them anything rarely worried about cameras. He took a step closer, close enough that Nathaniel could smell cologne underneath the coffee and grease smell of the diner. "Do you know who I am?" A guy yelling at someone who can't yell back. "I own 4 properties on this strip. This place exists because my company hasn't decided to bury it in code violations." The diner's owner, a heavyset man named Walt, came hustling out from behind the counter, apron strings flapping, panic written plain across his face. "Mr. Ashworth, please, there's no need," the man, Ashworth, raised one hand without even looking at him, and Walt went silent like he'd been trained to. The busboy, still on the floor, finally found his voice. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll replace everything, I promise." "What you'll do," Ashworth said, "is learn that incompetence has consequences." He reached toward the kid's collar like he meant to yank him up by it, and that was the moment Nathaniel's hand closed around his wrist before it got there. Fast. Clean. The kind of movement that didn't leave room for argument. Half the diner gasped before they'd even processed what they'd seen. Ashworth froze, less from the grip itself than from the sheer fact that someone had dared touch him at all. "You've just made a very expensive mistake." Nathaniel let go and stepped back half a pace, enough to show restraint, not retreat. "Don't touch him again." Walt was sweating openly now. "Nathaniel, please, just take Daisy home. I'll sort this." But Ashworth already had his phone out, dialing, turning slightly though he kept his voice loud enough to carry. Marcia, cancel the maintenance contract with Cole Refrigeration. Effective immediately. Nathaniel's stomach dropped before his brain caught up. What? Ashworth ended the call, almost amused now. You service two of the buildings I manage downtown, don't you? Not anymore. Daisy slid out of the booth, frightened now, her sugar packet tower forgotten and scattered. Dad? The server with the burn scar stepped forward, voice quiet but level. This has nothing to do with him. Ashworth ignored her entirely, pointing at Nathaniel like he was reading a sentence aloud. By tomorrow, every property manager in this city will know exactly why they shouldn't hire you. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he refused to let the man see what those words had cost. The young server's eyes moved between them, searching Nathaniel's face with something that wasn't pity. Calculation again. Like she was watching a piece move on a board only she could see. Ashworth straightened his coat one final time, stepped around the broken porcelain like it might dirty his shoes, and paused beside Walt on his way out. Fire the busboy before your next shift, or your lease review happens next month instead of next year. Then he left. The bell over the door rang once, absurdly cheerful in the silence he left behind. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then the diner erupted into low, nervous murmuring. The young server knelt without a word and started gathering broken plate fragments. Nathaniel crouched beside her, helping before she could tell him not to. You don't have to do that, she said. Neither did you. Up close, her hands were steady, almost elegant, not hands that had spent years carrying trays. Despite the calluses someone had clearly tried to fake with a pumice stone. The burn scar near her wrist was old, thin, the kind that came from actual work, just not this kind. Walt approached, ashamed. Bridget, I'm so sorry about that. Nathaniel glanced up. Bridget. The name sat strangely on her like a coat that didn't quite fit through the shoulders. Daisy crept over and handed the woman a paper napkin with total seriousness. You don't have to cry just 'cause he was mean. The woman blinked, surprised, then smiled. The first real expression Nathaniel had seen crossed her face all night. I wasn't planning to. Good, Daisy said. My dad gets mad when people are mean. That almost made Nathaniel laugh, despite the tightness still sitting in his chest. Walt cleared his throat, awkward. Nathaniel, about those contracts. Just say it. Ashworth owns or manages half the commercial leases on this strip. When he calls, people listen. Nathaniel nodded once. He'd expected nothing less. The woman stood too, tray forgotten on the floor. This happened because of me. It happened, Nathaniel said, because guys like him think nobody ever pushes back. She studied him for a long moment. Still, I'm sorry. He glanced toward Daisy, toward the rain streaking the dark windows. Sorry doesn't cover groceries. He regretted it the second he said it, watching her expression shift, not offended, just thoughtful, like the truth of it had landed somewhere real. Walt jumped in. Dinner's on the house tonight, both of you. Daisy tugged Nathaniel's sleeve. Can we still get pie? The ordinary small-stakes innocence of the question cracked something loose in the room. Walt actually laughed, just once. Yeah, pie too. 10 minutes later, while Daisy worked through a slice of pie with the kind of focus only kids brought to dessert, Nathaniel's phone buzzed 3 times in a row. First message, contract under review, services suspended pending inquiry. Second, tomorrow's scheduled maintenance canceled. Third, from a number he didn't recognize. We heard about tonight. Don't call again. He set the phone face down on the table, jaw tight. From across the diner, the woman noticed the change in his expression. Already? Guy works fast when he's punishing people. She folded a dish towel slowly, eyes unreadable. Then maybe he's punishing the wrong person this time. Nathaniel looked at her, trying to place the certainty in her voice. Before he could ask, another customer walked over holding up his phone. Hey man, you should see this. Someone posted a video. Nathaniel took the phone. There he was, standing between Ashworth and the busboy, Daisy visible in the booth behind him. The caption read, Local man threatens property manager during diner altercation. The comments were already multiplying, some defending him, some calling him unhinged, a few recognizing Ashworth by name. He handed the phone back without a word, but something cold settled in his chest. Tonight wasn't over. It had barely started. Outside, a dark SUV idled across the street, far longer than made sense, engine running, windows fogged. The woman noticed it through the rain-streaked glass, and her expression changed in a way Nathaniel almost missed. She reached up, peeled the name tag reading Bridget off her apron, and slid it into her pocket. He caught that too, Bridget? She met his eyes a second too long before answering. Borrowed name. Why borrow one? Because sometimes the truth tells you less than a disguise does. The SUV's headlights brightened across the street, and somewhere behind that glare, a phone call was already being made. One that had nothing to do with broken dishes and everything to do with the war Nathaniel Cole had just stumbled into without knowing whose it was. He barely slept. By dawn, the rain had stopped, but the quiet in his small rented house on the edge of Barhaven felt heavier than the storm had. The kitchen table was a mess of unpaid bills, one of Daisy's school drawings, and the battered notebook where he still logged every refrigeration job by hand because the app always crashed when it mattered. At 6:10, his phone rang before the coffee had finished brewing. Mrs. Okafor, who ran the bakery he serviced every second Thursday, sounding sorry before she even said a word, which told him everything. "Nathaniel, I'm so sorry. My landlord called before sunrise. Said if I keep using you, my lease inspection gets moved up by 6 months. "You don't have to explain," he said, leaning a hand against the counter, staring at the chip tile. "You're a good person. Good doesn't fix compressors." He hung up before her sympathy turned into something harder to carry than the insult had been. By 7:30, 3 more cancellations came in. By 8, the diner video had crossed onto a local news page. The headline shifted to something sharper. "Veteran confronts property manager in heated diner incident." Someone had dug up an old photo of him in uniform. Someone else had found a brief mentions of his medical discharge. By 9, the comments had turned ugly. Anger issues. Another unstable vet. Where was security? He flipped the phone face down when Daisy wandered into the kitchen in her school uniform, backpack hanging off one shoulder. "Are we okay?" she asked softly, because kids always knew when an adult was about to lie to them at breakfast. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We're still standing." She studied him for a second. "That means no." Before he could answer, a black SUV slowed in front of the house, idled 3 full seconds, then pulled away. Nathaniel clocked the tinted windows and filed it away without saying anything. After dropping Daisy at school, he drove to his first remaining job across town and found the gate padlocked, a printed notice zip-tied to the fence. Contract terminated. No signature, no explanation, just finality. He was still crumpling the paper in his fist when a silver sedan pulled into the lot, the same one he'd seen outside the diner. The woman stepped out in dark jeans and a beige coat, sunglasses on, nothing left of the waitress except the same unhurried calm in how she carried herself. "You tracked my address?" he asked, irritation rising before gratitude got a chance to. She slid the sunglasses off. "Your truck has your business name painted on the door. Subtle it isn't." She glanced at the crumpled notice in his hand. "So, now what? More apologies?" "A warning. I've had enough warnings for one morning." She looked down the empty street before she spoke again. "Reginald Ashworth doesn't stop at humiliation. He escalates until people either submit or disappear from his way." A short, bitter laugh. "Noticed? The SUV outside your house? That was him security contractors. He uses them when he wants the intimidation to have distance." Nathaniel stepped closer. "Who are you, actually?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she nodded at the notice in his hand. "How many contracts did you lose this morning?" 5. "By noon, you'll have lost more. You talk like you know his schedule." "I know his methods." His jaw tightened. "Then tell me how a waitress knows corporate intimidation tactics." Before she could answer, a pickup pulled into the lot behind them. 2 men climbing out in company jackets Nathaniel recognized. Regional compliance officers from Dunmore Property Group, the management company whose logo sat on half the buildings he serviced. One carried a clipboard. The other already had his phone out recording. "Nathaniel Cole?" the older one asked. "What now?" "We received a report of aggressive conduct toward one of our senior managers last night." A short laugh, sharper this time. "Aggressive. We need your signature acknowledging that further contact with Dunmore managed properties may result in trespassing charges." The woman's eyes narrowed, but she stayed quiet. "He shoved a kid," Nathaniel said, not taking the paper. The older officer glanced at the woman like she wasn't there. The employee involved filed no complaint. Nathaniel turned to her sharply. "Employee?" She still said nothing. The younger officer finally looked at her properly and froze for half a second, small, but Nathaniel caught it. Recognition. Something close to fear. The older man noticed too late. She lifted one hand and the man stopped mid-sentence. Her voice, when it came, had changed completely. Colder, sharper, every trace of the diner stripped out of it. "Continue." Both men straightened like they'd been called to attention. The older one swallowed. We were instructed by Miss Ashworth." "Claire," she said. No answer came. She stepped forward, removed the sunglasses for good, and looked at them with an authority that landed like a physical thing. "Tell Reginald that using compliance staff for personal retaliation violates 3 policies and 1 labor agreement he signed himself." Both men went pale. The younger one lowered his phone. "Yes, ma'am, ma'am," Nathaniel frowned. Her eyes stayed on the officers. "Leave." They left without another word. The silence afterward felt louder than any shouting could have. Nathaniel stared at her. "Who are you?" This time, she answered. Vivian Calder. The name landed a beat late, but it landed hard. Everyone in the city knew Calder Properties. Office towers, residential developments, half the new construction downtown. You're joking, I wish I were. A breath. I was working the floor at Waltz because Waltz is one of 41 independent businesses operating under franchise pressure from companies tied to my firm, and internal reports flagged executive abuse happening at the regional level. He stared at her, replaying the entire night through a different lens. So Ashworth didn't know who you were. He knew an audit was happening. He didn't know I was the one running it, a humorless laugh. And I stepped between a property mogul and one of her own executives, thinking I was protecting a busboy. You were protecting someone powerless in that moment, she said. That matters more than who I turned out to be. Anger surfaced fully now. Does it? Because my business is bleeding out this morning, and my daughter still needs rent paid while your board's probably discussing damage control over coffee. She took the hit without flinching. That's why I came before noon. Why noon? Because Reginald's already scheduled a press statement. His phone buzzed right on cue. She glanced at it but said nothing. He opened it. Local property executive claims man made alcohol-fueled threats during public altercation. He looked up slowly. Alcohol. He's moving faster than I expected, she said quietly. Building a narrative before I can stop it. He folded the phone shut. And where exactly do I fit into your corporate war? Her answer came low and for the first time completely honest. You weren't supposed to. A car pulled up fast, black, expensive, deliberate. Ashworth stepped out, coat immaculate, smile fully restored like the previous night had been theater he'd staged on purpose. He looked at Vivian first, then Nathaniel, then the termination notice on the ground. Well, he said, this is disappointing. Nathaniel moved half a step forward. Vivian raised one hand slightly without even looking at him. Ashworth ignored it entirely. Vivian, if you wanted secrecy, you might have picked a less industrial place to break it. Nathaniel's eyes cut toward her. Ashworth continued, amused. And you, he said to Nathaniel, must feel special. A full executive escort this early in the morning. Nathaniel said nothing. Let me save everyone some time, Ashworth went on. The board's already seen your audit summary, Vivian. Half of them think your methods have done more damage to investor confidence than any internal complaint ever could. And the other half, Vivian said, unreadable, are waiting to see whether you used company infrastructure for retaliation, fraud, and witness intimidation. Strategic enforcement isn't intimidation. Ashworth turned to Nathaniel, choosing attack over defense. By tonight, every parent at Daisy Cole's school will know her father threatened a senior executive in front of a child. Nathaniel went rigid. Vivian's face hardened instantly. You used school records. He shrugged. Public enough when contracts overlap with county donors. That was the moment Nathaniel's restraint nearly broke. Not at the insult, but at hearing his daughter's name in this man's mouth. Vivian stepped between them before the distance closed entirely, her voice dropping into something dangerous enough that even Ashworth recalculated. If you bring his daughter into this again, I will personally sign the criminal referral. He studied her a long moment, then smiled with that same polished poison. Then maybe you should decide whether he's worth the board seat you're about to lose. He returned to his car and left. Nathaniel exhaled hard through clenched teeth. Vivian stood still, watching the road long after the car disappeared. Then, finally, she said what neither of them had wanted to admit. This stopped being about last night the moment he realized you weren't afraid of him. Nathaniel looked at her, anger tangled now with something heavier. Then tell me the truth, Vivian. If I hadn't stood up in that diner, would you still have exposed him? Yes. A pause. Just not this fast. He looked toward the school in the distance, already picturing whispers reaching Daisy before lunch. Congratulations, he said quietly. Your truth just moved into my house. By late afternoon, public humiliation had taken on a different weight, quieter than shouting, somehow worse. No one confronted him outright. People just looked twice, lowered their voices, pretended not to recognize him from the morning's headlines. The local news had looped the diner footage so many times that even the freeze frame they'd chosen felt deliberate. Nathaniel rigid-jawed, Ashworth positioned to look calm and threatened. Someone had edited out the shove. Someone had muted the line about people staying stuck. He felt it most standing at the school gate, watching two mothers glance over and lower their voices. Daisy came out clutching her backpack to her chest, smiling until she caught his face. What happened? She asked quietly. He crouched to her level. Remember how I told you some people tell stories that make themselves look good? She nodded. They're doing that. She thought about it. Then why don't you tell yours louder? The simplicity of it nearly undid him. He smiled despite himself, until he saw the black sedan parked across the street again. Vivian stayed inside until Daisy had climbed into the truck. Only when Nathaniel crossed the road did she step out, holding a tablet and a folder thick with printed pages, looking less like the woman from the diner now and entirely like someone who belonged behind boardroom glass. Hair pulled back, navy coat sharp against the fading light. "The board's called an emergency session tonight," she said, no greeting. He folded his arms. "And I'm supposed to care." She handed him the tablet. A draft press release sat on the screen. Calder Properties confirms confidence in Regional Director Reginald Ashworth pending internal review. The company condemns all public threats against leadership. He read it twice. They're protecting him. Half the board thinks removing him now creates investor panic. The other half is waiting to see if I can prove he used company resources for intimidation and witness suppression before 6 o'clock tonight. Sounds like your problem. She didn't react right away. "Reginald sent your sealed military medical file to a board member an hour ago." His expression changed instantly. How would he even get that? Money opens records that should stay locked. She opened the folder, printed screenshots, internal emails, security invoices, lease manipulations, threats against small franchise owners. He's framing you as unstable because fear makes boards obedient. He stared at the form visible beneath the other papers. Old psychological evaluations from after his discharge, private words he'd once said to a doctor he barely remembered, now stripped of context and turned into ammunition. "He has no right. He has leverage," she corrected, "and tonight he's going to use your history as proof my judgment's compromised." He looked toward Daisy in the truck, drawing fog circles on the window. "Leave me out of it. He already made sure you can't be." He wanted to refuse. Every instinct told him rooms like the one she was describing destroyed men like him, wrote the ending before the witnesses even arrived. But then Daisy tapped the glass and held up her notebook. 3 crooked words pressed through the fog. "Tell yours louder." He looked at it, then back at Vivian. "If I go in there, I say exactly what I want to say. That's why I'm asking." By 6:20, the Calder Properties Tower glowed above downtown Ottawa like a different city entirely from the streets Nathaniel knew. Glass, marble elevators, silent enough to hear his own pulse. He wore the only dark jacket he owned, the one from Daisy's school recital last spring, a little tight through the shoulders but clean enough to pass. Vivian walked beside him through the lobby while employees pretended not to stare. Some recognized her first, others recognized him from the news. The elevator climbed in silence. Finally, he asked, "Why disguise yourself in a diner if you could have fired him with one email?" She kept her eyes on the folder. "Because people hide the truth when they know power is watching. They show it when they think nobody important is listening." "And what did you hear?" The doors opened. Enough to know Reginald built a private empire inside mine. The boardroom sat 12 people around a long table, most of them older, dressed in the kind of quiet wealth that didn't need to announce itself, tablets open, counsel hovering nearby. At the far end, Ashworth lounged with one ankle crossed over his knee like he was hosting rather than defending himself. He smiled when Nathaniel walked in. "Well, the guest star arrives." A few board members visibly stiffened. Vivian didn't sit. "Before anything else, all unofficial press drafts on this matter are suspended." A gray-haired man at the head of the table spoke first. "Vivian, that depends on whether tonight clarifies things or makes them worse." Ashworth leaned back. "It got worse the moment our CEO brought a civilian altercation into corporate governance." Nathaniel said nothing yet. He'd learned in rooms harder than this that powerful men revealed themselves fastest when silence forced them to keep talking. Vivian connected her tablet to the screen. Documents bloomed across it. Lease diversions, security contractor payments, shell reimbursements, intimidation costs routed through maintenance accounts, all signed under Ashworth's authorization. He didn't blink. Necessary asset protection, another document, a list of franchise owners pressured after filing complaints. Walt's name was on it, bakeries, cafes, small repair businesses. Nathaniel recognized half of them from his own canceled contracts. 41 businesses threatened with lease acceleration after reporting labor abuse, Vivian said. Ashworth leaned forward now. Strategic enforcement is not abuse. A board member frowned. "Did you authorize off-record surveillance on private contractors?" Vivian tapped again. Photos filled the screen. Nathaniel's truck outside his house, Daisy walking into school, timestamps, internal billing codes traced to Ashworth's office. The room shifted instantly. Even legal counsel sat up straighter. "Of a child?" Vivian asked. Ashworth didn't answer directly. Instead, he turned to Nathaniel, choosing offense over defense. "Would you like the board to read your post-deployment evaluations, Mr. Cole? Since transparency apparently matters now." Several heads turned. Vivian cut in sharply. "That file was obtained illegally." He slid the pages across the table anyway. "Anger episodes. Discharge review. Recommendation for monitored reintegration. Nathaniel recognized every line. The worst months after coming home, after hospital corridors, after losing Daisy's mother while he was still fighting an insurance company for approvals that never came in time. A board member looked uneasy. Why is this here? Because our CEO's judgment is uncompromised if she's trusting a volatile man who's already at the center of a media scandal. Ashworth said smoothly. The chairman looked at Nathaniel directly for the first time. Mr. Cole, if you're here, speak. Vivian stepped back, saying nothing. She'd promised him that room. Nathaniel stepped forward, palms flat on the polished table, out of place in his recital jacket but suddenly steady, because there was one thing powerful people never expected: plain speech, with nothing to hide behind. Yeah, he said. I had anger after I came home. I had nightmares. I flinched at doors closing for almost 2 years. The room went still, then my wife got sick. The insurance delays turned into forms. The forms turned into months. The months turned into a funeral I couldn't afford. Ashworth shifted, impatient, because Nathaniel wasn't collapsing under the weight of it the way he'd expected. So if you want to call me unstable for standing up when a man shoved a kid in front of a room full of strangers, do it honestly. Say the part where your executive humiliated someone weaker because he figured nobody would stop him. One board member lowered her eyes. Another quietly set Ashworth's documents aside. I didn't know Vivian called her from a waitress. I didn't know there were cameras. My daughter was in that booth. She watched a grown man go after a kid because he thought his rank made him untouchable. And you physically threaten corporate leadership, Ashworth said. Nathaniel turned to him fully. No. I embarrassed a bully who expected obedience. Vivian watched the table, the balance shifting, and Ashworth feeling it too. He stood abruptly. This is sentiment, not governance. Vivian pressed one final key. Audio filled the room. Ashworth's own voice pulled from the diner's security backup that Walt had quietly forwarded an hour earlier. Clear, unedited. Are you actually this incompetent? Then the shove. Then the threat about contracts. Nobody moved while it played. When it ended, the air in the room had gone cold. Ashworth stared at the screen, then at Vivian, understanding too late that the one witness he'd dismissed had recorded the moment he believed belonged only to him. The chairman took off his glasses slowly. Reginald, did you retaliate against private contractors this morning? Operational decisions, yes or no? Ashworth looked around the table and finally saw what Nathaniel had recognized years ago in rooms with far higher stakes. The exact second a room decided someone had become disposable. Vivian spoke again, almost without emotion now. He also signed off on the healthcare coverage rollback 12 years ago that pulled emergency support from county hospital partners. She paused. Including the program that delayed your wife's approval, Nathaniel. The blow landed somewhere deeper than anything that had come before it. Nathaniel stared at Ashworth like the room had emptied out around them. That came from a legal cost review, Ashworth said, and for the first time his composure cracked completely. You signed it. Silence. The chairman stood. Security. The word ended everything. 2 officers entered almost immediately. Ashworth looked around once, still calculating an exit through some authority that no longer existed for him. As they reached him, Nathaniel spoke one last time, not loud, but enough that the room held on to it. Power doesn't build character. It just takes the mask off. Nobody tried to follow that. Outside the glass wall, the city lights stretched out across a darkening sky, and for the first time all day, Vivian let herself take one slow breath, because the thing she'd spent months building toward had finally landed where it was supposed to. Ashworth was walked out without another word, but the silence he left behind sat heavier than any of his shouting had. The board members, who'd spent years protecting numbers, stared at the evidence still glowing on the screen like they were seeing their own company clearly for the first time. The chairman cleared his throat and announced an emergency suspension of every contract tied to Ashworth's office, a full audit of every intimidation complaint on file, and immediate protection for the franchise owners he'd targeted. Nathaniel barely heard it. The only thought left in his head was Daisy, probably still awake at home because she never slept well when he came back late. Vivian found him in the hallway a few minutes later, standing by the window with both hands in his jacket pockets, watching the traffic crawl far below. You were right, she said quietly. He didn't turn right away. About what? Some things cost more if you stay seated. That made him glance at her, and for the first time since the diner, neither of them needed to defend anything to the other. She held out a folded envelope. Walt asked me to give you this myself. Inside was a new service agreement, full-year refrigeration maintenance contract across every Calder-managed property in the city, signed personally by her. He looked at it, then at her. You don't need to fix everything with a contract. I know. That one's not charity. Walt sent over your work records from the last 4 years. Turns out everyone trusts you more than they trust my own maintenance department." A small, tired smile finally crossed his face. Later that night, she drove with him back to Walt's. The lights were still on, even though the sign said closed. Daisy sat half asleep in the same booth from the night before, coloring with a box of broken crayons. The second she saw Vivian, she sat up straight. "So," Daisy said, very seriously, "are you still a waitress, or are you the boss now?" Vivian laughed softly, sliding into the booth across from her. "Tonight? Maybe both." Daisy considered that for a moment, then pushed a crayon across the table like it settled the matter completely. Nathaniel watched them from the counter while Walt poured fresh coffee in silence. Outside, the city was still talking. The headlines would keep spinning for a few more days, and tomorrow would bring its own set of problems that no amount of money or courage could erase overnight. But inside that small diner, under warm yellow light, with the smell of pie cooling near the register, the noise finally felt far away. For the first time and longer than he could remember, Nathaniel didn't feel like life was bracing for the next blow. He just stood there, listening to Daisy laugh, and somehow that sound mattered more than everything that had broken to get there.